Here is something nobody says out loud. The advice that has dominated self-help culture for decades, the idea that you must control your emotions, master your reactions, dominate your inner world, might be the very thing keeping you trapped. Not because emotional discipline is wrong, but because the story we've been told about what that discipline actually is and where it comes from is built on a myth. And myths are dangerous not when they're obviously false, but when they contain just enough truth to feel completely right. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part most people never hear, and it changes everything about how you understand yourself. For most of your life, you've probably been told some version of this. Strong people don't let their emotions control them. Successful people master their reactions. Wise people remain calm no matter what. And so, without realizing it, you absorbed a hidden instruction. Emotions are the enemy. You started treating your anger like a malfunction, your anxiety like a character flaw, your grief like weakness you needed to push past. You started performing composure, building a version of yourself that looks controlled, that stays measured, that never quite breaks. And if you're honest with yourself right now, you know this hasn't made you free. It's made you exhausted. Because what we have been calling emotional mastery is often just a more sophisticated form of self-abandonment. And today, we are going to dismantle that myth completely. Not to give you permission to be chaotic, not to tell you that discipline doesn't matter, but to show you the real cost of the cultural idea you've been handed and replace it with something philosophically sharper, something that actually works. Save this video. You're going to want to return to it. Let's begin. Part 1. The myth and its origins. The myth of emotional control is not ancient. It has a specific cultural genealogy, and if we trace it honestly, we find something uncomfortable at the root. In the 19th century, particularly in British and American industrial culture, a specific ideal of manhood and productivity emerged. The ideal worker, the ideal soldier, the ideal executive was someone who did not let feelings interfere with function. Emotions were inefficiency. Grief slowed the assembly line. Fear disrupted the chain of command. Anger was acceptable only when directed outward, toward an enemy or a competitor, never inward, never examined. This industrial emotional logic migrated over time into the self-help tradition. And here is where it gets philosophically interesting. The Stoic tradition, which is one of the most sophisticated philosophical systems ever developed, got conscripted into this industrial mythology. The Stoics became the ancient mascots of suppression. Marcus Aurelius became a motivational poster about not complaining. Epictetus became a meme about not caring what others think. But that reading is a profound distortion. The real Stoic project was not about suppressing emotion. It was about understanding the difference between two fundamentally different types of inner movement. And this distinction is something most people who quote Stoicism have never actually encountered. The Stoics called them pathe and eupathei. Pathe, often translated as passions, were not emotions in the modern sense. They were specifically judgments that had been mistaken. The anger that arises when you believe something external has damaged your essential worth. The grief that collapses you because you've decided your value depended on what you've lost. The anxiety that paralyzes because you've assigned your safety to something outside your control. These were not simply feelings. They were cognitive errors dressed as feelings. The eupathei, often translated as good emotions or rational affections, were something entirely different. They were emotional responses that arose from correct judgment. The joy of recognizing your own capacity for virtue. The caution that comes from genuine wisdom about risk. The warmth of connection that doesn't depend on the other person being perfect. The Stoic philosophers were not asking you to feel less, they were asking you to feel more accurately. This is a completely different project than what the self-help myth has handed you. The myth says, suppress, control, dominate your emotional experience. The real philosophical tradition says, understand what your emotional experience is actually responding to, because most of the time, it is responding to a story, not to reality. Those two things look similar on the surface. They produce completely different human beings underneath. Part 2. The real cost. Let me be very precise about what the myth actually costs you, because this is not abstract. This is happening in your life right now. When you adopt the myth of emotional control, the performance version, the suppression version, 3 specific things happen. First, you lose access to your most important information. Emotions are not noise in the signal. They are the signal. The French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty spent much of his life arguing something that neuroscience has since confirmed, that the body knows before the mind articulates. Your emotional responses are not interruptions to your intelligence. They are a form of intelligence. An older, faster, often more accurate intelligence than the verbal reasoning you use to justify things afterward. When you practice suppression, when you train yourself to override the emotional response before examining it, you are not becoming wiser. You are cutting yourself off from data. The executive who suppresses the unease he feels before a major decision because feeling uneasy doesn't fit the image of a confident leader. The person who overrides the discomfort in a relationship because being uncomfortable feels like weakness. The professional who ignores the exhaustion, signaling that something fundamental is wrong with how she's living. The suppression myth doesn't make you stronger. It makes you deaf to yourself. Second, you create a performance identity that slowly disconnects you from your actual character. There is a philosopher named Harry Frankfurt, not ancient, a 20th century thinker, who developed a concept worth understanding here. He distinguished between first-order desires and second-order desires. First-order desires are what you want. Second-order desires are your desires about your desires, what you think you should want, what you wish you were the kind of person who wanted. The suppression myth operates entirely at the second-order level. It tells you, you shouldn't want to react. You shouldn't feel that anger. You shouldn't have that fear. And so you construct a second-order identity, a performance self that overrides the first-order experience constantly. The problem Frankfurt identified is this. When second-order desires completely dominate first-order experience, you don't become more integrated as a person. You become more fragmented. You become someone who is always performing a version of themselves, rather than actually living as themselves. This is why people who have spent years practicing the suppression version of emotional control often describe a strange inner emptiness. Not peace, emptiness. Because peace is the presence of something, a genuine orientation toward your experience. Emptiness is the absence of contact with yourself. Third, and this is the one no one talks about, the suppression myth fundamentally misunderstands what genuine emotional regulation actually requires. Real emotional regulation is not achieved through suppression. It is achieved through integration. The research on this, and here philosophy and contemporary psychology meet in a genuinely interesting way, consistently shows that emotional suppression increases physiological stress even when behavioral expression is reduced. You can look completely calm while your body is in maximum activation. The performance is working. The internal reality is the opposite of what you're presenting. Integration means something different. It means the emotional signal is received, examined, understood, and then responded to, not simply overridden. That is an enormously more demanding practice than suppression. It requires something suppression never asks of you: genuine self-knowledge. Part 3. The philosophical framework you actually need. Now we need to build something, not just critique what doesn't work, but articulate what does. And I want to use a thinker who is almost never brought into these conversations: the Stoic philosopher Chrysippus. Chrysippus was the third leader of the Stoic school, probably the most technically rigorous mind the tradition produced, and he developed something called the theory of catalepsis, which is usually translated as cognitive impression. Here is the core idea, stripped to its essentials. At any moment, your mind receives an impression, an appearance of reality. Something happens, and before you have time to reason about it, your mind has already produced an interpretation of what happened and what it means. This interpretation has emotional content built into it. When someone criticizes you in public, the impression your mind produces might be, "I have been damaged. My worth has been diminished. This is a threat." The emotional response, the flush of anger, the wave of shame, follows immediately from that impression. Not from the event, from the impression. Chrysippus was insisting on something radical. The emotion is not the problem. The impression that generated it might be. The work, the real Stoic work, is to develop what he called synchetathesis, the capacity to pause before you assent to an impression, to ask, is this impression accurate? Does this event actually mean what my initial reading says it means? This is not suppression. This is interrogation. You are not pushing the emotion away. You are following it back to its source, the cognitive interpretation, and asking whether that interpretation is actually true. This is the philosophical framework that most self-help content on emotional control completely misses. And here is why it matters practically. When you suppress, you leave the impression intact. You just refuse to act on the emotion it generated. But the impression is still there, operating below the surface, shaping your perception, influencing your decisions, accumulating over time. When you interrogate, when you practice genuine synchetathesis, you are working at the level where the experience is actually being constructed. You are changing not just your behavior, but your relationship to reality itself. Let me give you a concrete illustration. Imagine a person, someone in a professional setting, who receives feedback that their work needs significant revision. The impression that forms immediately might be, "I am not good enough. I have been exposed. The people I respect now see my inadequacy." The suppression response: feel the shame, feel the anger, override it, maintain a professional expression, thank the person for the feedback, go home, and feel terrible. The synchetathesis response: notice the emotion, follow it to the impression, and ask a series of precise questions. Is it true that this feedback means I am not good enough? Or does it mean that this particular work, at this particular moment, fell short of what was needed? Are those the same thing? Is my worth actually located in whether this project succeeded? What part of this response is information about the work, and what part is information about where I have placed my sense of value? Those are radically different internal processes, and they produce radically different human beings over time. Part 4. Where this framework breaks the cultural myth entirely. Here is the interpretive twist. the place where everything we've built so far inverts the received idea. The cultural myth of emotional control is based on a fundamentally adversarial model of the self. Emotions are enemies. Reason is the general. Control is achieved when reason defeats emotion, when the general suppresses the mutiny. This model is not only philosophically wrong, it is psychologically harmful. Because the self is not a hierarchy with reason at the top, commanding the unruly lower functions. The self is a conversation. And like any conversation, it only produces wisdom when all the participants are genuinely heard, not when some participants are silenced in favor of others. The Stoic tradition at its best, not the meme version, but the actual philosophical tradition, understood this. Chrysippus described the ideal Stoic mind not as a general who has defeated his troops, but as a city where all the citizens are in agreement because they have all genuinely understood what is good. The image is radically different from suppression. It is not force the emotion into submission. It is cultivate the conditions under which the emotion and the reason are no longer in conflict, because both have been educated to understand reality accurately. This is the project, not performance, not suppression, education of the whole self. And this is what changes everything about how you approach your inner life. You stop treating your anger as a malfunction to be corrected. You start treating it as a student to be educated. You stop treating your anxiety as weakness to be overcome. You start treating it as a voice that has learned to respond to the wrong signals, and you ask what signals it should actually be responding to. You stop the war inside yourself, and you begin something considerably harder and considerably more rewarding: genuine self-knowledge. Part 5. Practical architecture for living this. Most people who have made it this far in the video are not people who need more motivation. They need a more precise map. So let me give you one. This is not a list of habits or techniques. This is a philosophical architecture, a way of relating to your inner experience that, practiced consistently, changes the structure of how you live. The first element is what I'll call the gap practice. Not the pause, the gap. The pause suggests you are stopping something from happening. The gap suggests you are opening a space where something new can occur. When an emotional response arises, particularly an intense one, your primary practice is not to suppress it, not to express it, but to widen the gap between the impression and your assent. In practical terms, you feel the anger rise, you notice it rising, you do not act from it immediately, and crucially, you do not simply wait for it to subside. You use the gap to ask, what impression produced this? What is my mind saying this event means? Is that accurate? Those questions are not rhetorical. They require genuine answers. The answer is often uncomfortable because the impression that produces our strongest emotional reactions is usually one that tells us something about where we have placed our sense of value, safety, or worth. The second element is what Chrysippus called oikeiosis, often translated as affiliation or orientation toward the appropriate. It is the practice of understanding what actually belongs to you, what is genuinely your domain, versus what you have mistakenly taken ownership of. Most emotional suffering, not all, but most, arises from trying to own things that are not yours to own. The outcome of a conversation that hasn't happened yet. The opinion of someone who barely knows you. The way a situation you cannot control will resolve. When you practice oikeiosis consistently, You are not becoming indifferent to these things. You are becoming accurate about your relationship to them. You care, but you care with open hands. You invest your genuine attention and effort, and then you release the outcome. Not because outcomes don't matter, but because the outcome was never actually yours to control. This is different from detachment. Detachment is often just another form of suppression, not feeling in order to avoid the pain of caring. Oikeiosis is full engagement without false ownership. The third element is what I want to call character archaeology. This is the practice that most people avoid because it requires the most from them. Every intense emotional pattern in your life, the anger that always arises in a particular kind of situation, the anxiety that appears around a specific category of challenge, the grief that surfaces in response to certain kinds of loss, these are not random. They are not evidence of weakness. They are evidence of a structure. Somewhere, usually early, usually in conditions you didn't choose, you formed impressions about what certain kinds of events mean, about what they say about your worth, your safety, your place in the world. Character archaeology is the practice of excavating those impressions, not therapeutically, not with the goal of assigning blame, but philosophically, with the goal of understanding whether those impressions are true. Because most of them are not. Most of the impressions that generate your most disruptive emotional patterns were formed in conditions that no longer apply. They were accurate interpretations of a specific environment at a specific time by a mind that had limited resources and no philosophical framework. The work is not to delete those impressions. It is to update them, to bring them into contact with what you now understand about reality, and to make a genuine, considered decision about whether you want to continue assenting to them. This is deep work. It takes time. It is not comfortable, but it is the only work that actually changes the structure, rather than just managing the surface. Part 6. The inversion that completes the picture. I want to end with something that might initially feel wrong, and I want you to sit with that discomfort, because the discomfort itself is the point. The goal of inner work, of genuine philosophical development, of real emotional maturity, is not to become someone who is never disturbed. Let me say that more precisely. The person who is never disturbed is not the Stoic ideal. The person who is never disturbed is either someone who has achieved complete wisdom, which no human being in history has credibly claimed, or someone who has achieved complete disconnection. And disconnection is not wisdom. Disconnection is just a more successful suppression. The real Stoic ideal, the version that Chrysippus, Epictetus, and the later Stoic tradition actually articulated, is someone who is disturbed accurately. This is a philosophically radical idea. Accurate disturbance means your emotional responses correspond to what is actually happening, not to a distorted impression of what's happening. You feel genuine grief when something genuinely worth grieving is lost, but not because you've decided your worth depended on it. You feel genuine anger when something genuinely unjust has occurred, but not because your ego has been scratched. You feel genuine fear when something genuinely threatening approaches, but not at the magnitude of an existential catastrophe when the actual situation is a professional inconvenience. Accuracy, not absence. This reframes the entire project. You are not trying to build walls against your emotional life. You are trying to calibrate it. And calibration requires contact with the experience, not distance from it. This is the full inversion of the cultural myth we began with. The myth says, strong people feel less, or at least show less. The philosophical reality says, developed people feel more accurately, which sometimes means feeling things very intensely, and sometimes means being unmoved by what would have previously destabilized them, but always from a foundation of genuine understanding rather than performed control. The difference is not visible from the outside. From the outside, the suppressor and the developed person might look identical in a difficult moment, both measured, both composed, both choosing their response deliberately. But inside, something entirely different is happening. The suppressor is fighting themselves. The developed person is in conversation with themselves. One produces increasing fragmentation. The other produces increasing integration. And integration, the gradual bringing together of your reason, your emotional intelligence, your values, and your actions into something coherent, is the actual goal. Not composure, not performance, not the absence of inner weather. A self that is genuinely unified around an accurate understanding of what matters. Closing. Most people who watch videos about emotional mastery leave with a technique, a breathing exercise, a mantra, a list of things to remember when they feel angry. I want you to leave with something different. I want you to leave with a question, the specific question that, if you take it seriously, begins to dismantle the myth from the inside out. The question is this: when I feel something I have been trained to suppress or manage or overcome, am I feeling something that is wrong? Or am I feeling something that is pointing, however clumsily and imprecisely, at something real? Because if it's the second, and far more often than the myth allows, it is the second, then the practice is not suppression. The practice is inquiry. Not, how do I stop feeling this? But, what is this feeling actually responding to? And is that response accurate? That single shift, from suppression to inquiry, is not a technique. It is a different relationship to your own existence. It is what it looks like when philosophy stops being something you read and becomes something you live. If this video reached you, not just your attention, but something underneath the attention, share it with someone who is fighting the version of themselves they've been told they shouldn't be. Leave a comment with the question this raised for you, not the answer, the question. Because the right question is worth more than a premature answer. And if you've never thought about the difference between a self that performs composure and a self that has genuinely integrated its experience, this channel goes deeper on exactly that. There is no end to this kind of thinking. There is only the next honest question. Ask it. That is all philosophy has ever asked of anyone.